When people first watched The Matrix, many felt a strange shock, not just because of the action or visual effects, but because something about it felt disturbingly familiar. The idea that reality might be an illusion, that what we perceive as solid and real could actually be constructed, dependent, and ultimately empty, struck a deep psychological chord. But what most people don't realize is that this idea is not modern at all. Nearly 2,000 years before Neo took the red pill, a philosopher named Nagarjuna developed a radical vision of reality that echoes through the very core of the film. Nagarjuna was one of the most influential thinkers in the history of Buddhism, and his central teaching revolves around a concept known as sunyata, or emptiness. At first glance, emptiness sounds like nihilism, like a claim that nothing exists. But that is not what Nagarjuna meant. His insight is far more subtle and, in many ways, far more unsettling. He argued that things do not exist independently, from their own side, with fixed and permanent essence. Instead, everything that exists does so only in dependence on other things, causes, conditions, concepts, and perception. Think about the world you experience every day. You see objects, people, buildings, your own body, your thoughts. It all feels solid, continuous, and undeniably real. But Nagarjuna invites us to question this certainty. What is a thing, really? Take something simple. Like a chair. Is the chair the wood? The shape? The function? If you remove the legs, is it still a chair? If you burn it, where does the chair go? The more closely you analyze it, the more the idea of a fixed, independent chair begins to dissolve. What you call a chair is just a label imposed on a collection of parts, conditions, and purposes. This is where the connection to the Matrix becomes powerful. In the film, the world people experience is a simulation generated by machines, a constructed reality fed directly into the mind. The characters believe in the solidity of their world until they begin to question it. Nagarjuna's insight operates differently, but leads to a similar destabilization. He doesn't say reality is a computer simulation, but he does say that what we take to be inherently real is actually constructed through dependent processes. In a sense, we are always interpreting, always projecting, always assembling reality rather than directly perceiving it as it is. One of Nagarjuna's most famous methods was to dismantle concepts using logic itself. If something truly existed independently, it would not depend on anything else. But everything we observe clearly depends on causes and conditions. A tree depends on a seed, soil, sunlight, water, time. Without these, the tree cannot exist. But if it depends on these, then it cannot exist independently. And if it does not exist independently, then its existence is not fixed or inherent. It is relational, contingent, and empty of its own essence. This creates a strange and almost paradoxical situation. Things exist, but not in the way we think they do. They are not solid, independent entities, they are more like patterns or processes. In The Matrix, Neo eventually realizes that the rules of the simulated world are not absolute. Bullets can be stopped, gravity can be bent, reality can be reshaped. Why? Because the system is not fundamentally solid, it is coded, conditional, and malleable. Nagarjuna's philosophy suggests something similar about our own experience, though in a more philosophical and experiential sense. Another key idea in Nagarjuna's teaching is the rejection of extremes. He argued against both the belief that things absolutely exist and the belief that nothing exists at all. Instead, he pointed to a middle way, where phenomena arise dependently and function conventionally, but lack ultimate, independent reality. This is incredibly important, because it prevents his philosophy from collapsing into pure nihilism. The world still appears, actions still have consequences, suffering still exists. But the way we interpret these things, solid, permanent, inherently real, is what leads to confusion and attachment. In The Matrix, people who are plugged into the system live their lives as if everything is normal. They eat, work, struggle, and suffer, all within a constructed environment. The illusion is powerful because it is consistent and shared. Similarly, our everyday reality feels unquestionable because it is reinforced by perception, language, and social agreement. We all agree that a chair is a chair, that a self is a self, that the world is made of stable objects. But Nagarjuna asks us to look deeper, to see that this shared agreement does not equal ultimate truth. Perhaps the most unsettling implication of Nagarjuna's philosophy is what it says about the self. Just as a chair is not inherently a chair, the self is not inherently a self. What you call I is also a collection of parts, body. Sensations, perceptions, thoughts, memories, all constantly changing and dependent on conditions. There is no fixed core, no unchanging essence that stands behind experience. This can feel disorienting, even frightening, because it challenges one of our deepest assumptions, that we are solid, continuous individuals. In The Matrix, Neo's journey is not just about discovering the truth of the external world, but also about transforming his understanding of himself. He moves from being a passive participant in the system to someone who can see through it and act freely within it. Nagarjuna's insight offers a similar possibility. By seeing that the self is empty, not non-existent, but not fixed, we loosen the grip of fear, attachment, and rigid identity. We begin to experience life with more flexibility and openness, but this understanding is not merely intellectual. Nagarjuna did not intend his philosophy to be just a theory. It is meant to be realized directly, to be seen in one's own experience. When you observe your thoughts, do they stay the same? When you examine your emotions, do they have a fixed essence? When you look at the world, can you find anything that exists completely on its own, without dependence? This kind of inquiry begins to reveal the fluid, dynamic nature of reality. In a way, the matrix we live in is not a machine-generated simulation, but a conceptual one. It is built from language, perception, memory, and belief. We navigate it every day without questioning its foundations. Nagarjuna's teaching is like a philosophical red pill, not because it replaces one illusion with a hidden true world, but because it dissolves the very idea of fixed reality altogether. What remains is not nothingness, but a more open, interconnected way of experiencing existence. This is why Nagarjuna's ideas continue to resonate even today. In a world increasingly shaped by virtual realities, digital identities, and constructed environments, the question of what is real becomes more urgent. But his answer does not depend on technology. It points to something deeper, that reality, as we experience it, has always been dependent, relational, and empty of inherent essence. The power of this realization is not that it makes life meaningless, but that it frees us from rigid ways of seeing. If things are not fixed, they can change. If the self is not solid, it can transform. If suffering is not inherent, it can be understood and reduced. This is the liberating aspect of emptiness, not a void, but a space of possibility. So when you think about the Matrix, consider this: the idea that reality might not be what it seems did not begin with science fiction. It began with deep philosophical inquiry into the nature of existence itself. Nagarjuna did not need computers or simulations to uncover this insight. By examining experience with relentless logic and clarity, he arrived at a vision of reality that is just as radical, just as unsettling, and perhaps even more profound. In the end, the question is not whether we are living in a literal simulation, but whether we are willing to question the assumptions that shape our experience. What if the solidity we rely on is not as solid as it appears? What if the boundaries we take for granted are more fluid than we think? And what if, by seeing this clearly, we could step beyond confusion and into a deeper understanding of what it means to exist? That is the real connection between Nagarjuna and the Matrix, not just the idea that reality is an illusion, but the invitation to wake up. Thanks for watching. Our channel is new and needs your support. In our channel you can find many videos on the history and philosophical teachings of Buddhism. Please subscribe to our channel to support the teachings of Buddha on YouTube.